This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the first half of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's 1990 novel, Good Omens. All right, James, so if one of us is a demon, one of us is an angel, and we're friends throughout all of time, who's who in this partnership we have here?
That's a really good question.
Do you see yourself in one of those characters more?
I think we're both going to feel the same way because, I don't see myself as angelic in any way. You know what I mean? I'm not an angel, so I guess that would default me to a demon. I don't think I'm quite a demon, but I'm definitely, leaning more towards that way.
So you're saying we're both demons?
I think we're a double demon situation here.
I don't know. I mean, I could play the angel. I mean, I like Aziraphale. It definitely seems interesting because, from the trailers, I get a slightly different vibe from the Michael Sheen character. Portrayal of this character than I got from the book. But I'll be curious to see how that plays out. Yeah, I mean, I like him enough. I could be Aziraphale. if you want to be Crowley.
Cool, I'll be Crowley. I mean, I think the evil side is more interesting, right? We got the better music.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little jealous because Crowley is awesome, but
yeah.
I'll do what I have to do for the podcast.
So I actually haven't seen any of the trailers, and I'm really holding off from everything because I think I may have seen a Twitter ad or something for it. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear any sound or anything, and I just saw David Tennant at MegaCon where he talked a little bit, very very briefly about Good Omens. Not anything spoilery, but going into this, I didn't know all that much about it, so I'm just and I'm really taken with it. I'm just gonna start off by saying that I'm really loving this.
Yeah, agreed. I got to ask you more about that. MegaCon thing, but first, I actually think it would be interesting if anybody wants to weigh in on which one of us they think is the devil and which one's the angel. That would be interesting. So if anybody wants to weigh in, I'd be curious to hear that. If you could be funny. Force yourself to pick, it'd be funny. But yeah, so you went and saw him talk at MegaCon in Orlando. What was that like?
It was cool, man. I mean, David Tennant, he was the first Doctor that I watched on Doctor Who, mm-hmm. and really, I think I fell in love with Doctor Who because of David Tennant. And so, I've always really liked his sense of humor and kind of the stuff that he's done. And then, I followed him through Broadchurch and Jessica Jones, and I think he's a great actor. So I was just excited to see him in general, mostly as a Doctor Who fan. And then mm-hmm. Knowing this project was coming up was another reason why I was I gotta see him. The guy is so funny, so well spoken. He would be so much fun to have a beer with and hang out with, or talk about philosophical topics or something like that. He just seems like he's got a little bit of everything in him.
So did it whet your appetite for this novel, hearing him talk about it?
It really did. Just the series specifically, because I still didn't know what to think of the novel, and just the tone right off the bat, and the how funny it is. It's laugh out loud, hilarious.
Well, we can't forget Terry Pratchett too, because that's, I think, a large part of the tone of this novel. To me, feels I haven't read a lot of Pratchett, but from what I understand, seems is a very Pratchett-esque kind of thing. Maybe if you read a ton of it, you can kind of tell the difference. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to cover some Pratchett at some point.
I mean, this book has made me. I want to read more Gaiman and Pratchett. I'm game for whatever. And it is interesting to see a novel written by two authors, right?
Yeah. So speaking of that, my introduction to this novel was I saw that Neil Gaiman appeared on the Tim Ferriss show, which I haven't watched a lot of Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all.
I honestly don't even think I know who that is.
Yeah, I think he does a podcast. I don't know if he does other stuff. I really don't know much about him, but I saw Neil Gaiman was on his podcast, and it's a video podcast you can watch on YouTube. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, because I love Neil Gaiman as a person. He just seems awesome. And
I just I think I said on our core line coverage, if anything else, I love Neil Gaiman for his Twitter game. Everything he says on Twitter is amazing, and he's always got something insightful or interesting going on. So
I listened to this interview with him, which as a writer, I just find it really fascinating to hear people talk about their process, and he talks a lot about process in that interview. and it was great. And then all of a sudden, like halfway through, Tim Ferriss asks him about Good Omens and Terry Pratchett, and he talks about it for like 30 minutes, and it's amazing, and it's like heartbreaking but funny and just really interesting. He talks about their relationship and all the stuff that went into it, and I was like, oh man, this is so good. James has to watch this. And then I forced myself to not send it to you because I was like, wait, if I send it to him, then I can't talk to him about it like in the same way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that he says without, quoting it word for word. And then after this episode, I'm going to have you go watch it because it's amazing. It's a really, really good interview. And I just like Neil Gaiman. I just want him to be like my literary dad, I think. I just want to like learn from him and just be like, teach me everything you know. And he has like a storytelling. You ever hear the masterclass thing? There's like a storytelling masterclass thing that he's got out now that I honestly like might sign up for because it seems like he has all the knowledge and I just want to hear everything he has to say.
I might do a masterclass here soon as well because I think I'm like 99% sure I remember this being a thing like a couple months ago, but Martin Scorsese did a masterclass as well, so like I gotta watch that.
Yeah, well maybe we can split a membership and see if they don't shut us down.
Yeah.
We probably shouldn't put it on the internet if we're gonna do that. Whatever.
Masterclass, we're gonna do 2 subscriptions. We're sorry.
So, but yeah, man, we got to talk about this. So general thoughts about the novel. We're gonna start off, no spoilers. I just want to hear like, I know you said you were into it, but just more of your general reaction to reading. We've only read the first half, which was up through the end of Friday, and then like there's a page that says Saturday, and we stopped at that. So if you wanted to know like how far we got, and if you wanted to read up to that point, that's where we're at.
Just like some context, I was raised in a house that was religious, and I read the Bible a lot. I went to church, and it's really tickling my funny bone. Like it's so funny. The like some of the references and jokes that they're poking at are just like so. I mean, just brilliant. And then I think the main thing I want to talk about though is like the tone. This is my favorite tone of like it's kind of like this like cynical, funny, but also like well informed and like well researched information that's backing it up.
Have you read Hitchhiker's Guide?
I was about to bring that up. I was literally about to bring that up.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite books. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of my favorite books, and so that's as soon as I was a couple chapters in, I was like, this is just like Hitchhiker's Guide, and I got on my phone and I was like, I did make sure that Neil Gaiman didn't have a hand in Hitchhiker's Guide or like Terry Pratchett or something.
No, Douglas Adams. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I made sure. If it isn't just like the more, I mean, I guess it's not quite as absurd as Hitchhiker's Guide. It's not like it jumps all over the place.
If you were more religious, you might think differently. Because I think if you're like a really religious person and you read this book, it's going to be kind of troubling for you because of how much they're taking a piss out of everything that is related to heaven and hell and the demons and the angels, and it's all so good.
I like to think that there's got to be some religious people out there that read this though and just think it's like so funny and like can like take it with a grain of salt.
If you could be religious and just have a sense of humor about the whole thing, Exactly. Hopefully there are people like that absolutely love this.
And like you said, like I'm not religious anymore, and if anything, I'm agnostic. So it's just like but just like having that background, that's another thing, is the background of the story. The idea of taking like within our modern day mythology, like the mythology of the Bible, that's been like every single person in the world has some sort of connection to it or knows it in some way or is familiar with the characters, if you will. And using that as a basis to tell a story is so, and you're already ingrained in the story a little bit because you're familiar with some of the characters, you're familiar with the goings on, you're familiar with the world, heaven and hell, and I think that's amazing to take something like that and build your world around existing built-in material that people are going to bring to, like, baggage that people will bring to the story.
Yeah, I mean, if we can kind of zoom out a little bit and think about fantasy as a genre, I wonder where this really falls, because like I've said before on the podcast, I'm not a historian of genre. I don't know. I haven't read enough to really say for sure. But written in 1990, being so heavily influenced by Christianity and like recognizable characters in the pantheon of, devils and demons, this is all stuff that there are, like, you keep seeing this done. Like, I couldn't not think of Supernatural, right? Have you seen any of Supernatural?
I've seen a couple episodes here and there.
Okay.
I haven't ever watched it though.
I feel like they lean heavily on this kind of stuff, and I feel like I've read other things like this, and think I don't know how much of it to tie to this book. I wish I knew more, but being so early on, relatively, it feels to me like this is probably really influential, and a lot of books have come after. You know, whether they'd say like, hey, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it more serious, or I'm going to do it and I'm going to also be funny, but I'll do it kind of, you know, about something different pantheon or something. I just feel like this book has to have been hugely influential. I know that it's also really, especially Terry Pratchett, is immensely popular in the United Kingdom, whereas Neil Gaiman, I think, is bigger in the US of the two, perhaps. But Terry Pratchett's like one of the best-selling authors of all time in the UK. I think it was surpassed by J.K. Rowling, but he was like in the number one spot until that happened. So like that shows you how immensely popular Terry Pratchett is over there. So for these two authors to come together and write this book is also just like a powerhouse combo, right? Like that's so cool to me. And I was really fascinated to hear him talk about the process of what it was like working with Terry Pratchett on this novel. And he definitely talks about that some on the Tim Ferriss interview, which we'll put in our show notes. I definitely highly recommend you check it out if I didn't already sell it enough. It's a great interview. I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff he says just so we can kind of pick it apart and think about it. But the best thing to do is to go watch it. I mean, I guess I'll give a little bit of my general thoughts before we get into that, I guess. But yeah, to echo what you said, I think it was incredible. And it's definitely satire, and the satire like permeates down to the line, which I think is great. So you get a lot of hilarious sentences and prose style, and it breaks a lot of rules, and it just has fun. And that's one of the things that really struck me, is that like it's having fun in every paragraph. It's having fun in like the way the story is being framed. At the beginning, it says this is the what is it? The nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch, is on the opening, and then it says that it's like footnotes by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, as if like they didn't write the book, but they just did the footnotes, and it's just really funny, right? And it's like all in this kind of meta way. They're playing with that, and they're in the cast, like the dramatis personae that you get at the beginning, which is another funny bit, right? To have that, and they're even in there as the footnote writers. It's so clever, and like I said, like everything about the book is crafted in such a way to reflect that tone and reflect that joy and hilarity. And I really hope that comes across in the show, and that they're able to. They're having to do it in a slightly different way, obviously, because it's not going to be a book. But I'm really hopeful that they can get some of that, and it looks like they have from what I've seen. And another thing that I want to delve into when we do get to the actual show is the fact that Neil Gaiman is like the showrunner and writer of the show, which I think is pretty incredible as one of the authors. Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of like hitting a certain voice, it's so important to have the creator right there with like alongside, you know, like Game of Thrones just ended. So something that comes to mind is like, you know, when George R. R. Martin was executive producing and was right there with them, it seemed like the show was more true to his voice, at least.
Yeah. Well, that's another whole giant can of worms we could get into, but I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to sidestep that and keep the focus on Good Omens. We're thinking about talking Game of Thrones in our bonus episode this month for our patrons. So maybe we'll save it for that. But yeah, I think before we get into even this background stuff with the authors, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We got a couple things going on. Right now we're doing a giveaway for this novel, Good Omens. It's the tie-in edition we got from the publisher, William Morrow. And we're going to be giving out 6 copies, and it's going to be two to Twitter, 2 to Instagram, 2 to Facebook. Find us at inktofilm on all 3, and you can see the post for how to enter, and it has the instructions. And basically, it's like share this post, tag somebody, stuff like that. You can enter to win on all 3 places and increase your chances. We encourage you to do that. We want to give these books out to fans of Neil Gaiman and people who are curious about it, and we hope you find that and engage with it.
So just for like a little, maybe to even entice you to enter even a little bit more, we've been covering books and their adaptations for like close to 2 years now. Yeah. And we're halfway through this book, and I'm going to make the bold claim that this is in my top 3 favorite books that we've read for the podcast. It's way up there. Well, I would say books that I hadn't already read.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like coming to something new, like new material. This is in my top 3 new book experiences.
I guess I haven't really reflected on it yet because I haven't finished it. So I'm going to be curious once I finish it how I feel about it. Maybe I'll see where I'm at.
I'll throw an update out there once we finish it, because if it completely goes off the rails or something, I'll let you know. But so far, I'm just absolutely in love with it.
Yeah, and we covered, by the way, if you're a Neil Gaiman fan, we also covered Coraline, I don't know, 20, 30 episodes ago, and really had a good time with that. So definitely check out those episodes if you're curious. The other bit of housekeeping is that we have recently launched our YouTube channel, and currently we have our It by Stephen King coverage and our Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Philip K. Dick novel coverage, which comprised our first 10 episodes of this thing. It was pretty deep, and we did both Blade Runner films. Anyway, that's all up on YouTube, and if you wanted to check it out, give us a subscribe. That would be awesome. We can help build the channel a little bit. We're gonna have plans in the future to maybe do some extra content on there that is separate from the regular podcast feed. So you're gonna want to be subscribed if you're curious about that. Oh, and so if this is your first time listening, our plan is to do the first half here, second half next week, and then we're going to do the first 3 episodes of the show, and then we'll do the last 3 episodes of the show. So it'll be 4 episodes consecutive here coming up on Good Omens. We hope you stick around for all of them.
All right, so I'm interested. I want to hear how you possibly write a novel with 2 people.
I mean, that's going to vary from person to person. But from what I understand from that thing and some other stuff I've read, essentially Neil Gaiman came up with the idea independently of a mishap. This is not really a spoiler. This is kind of the premise. But a baby swap mishap with the Antichrist. And then he also came up with the idea of a group of demons comparing like what deeds they've done recently to appease their dark lords, and like 2 of them have done like really dark stuff, and then like the third one really hasn't done that much, and he's trying to kind of act that like he is and play it up. And he thought like those 2 scenes seemed like they could be related in the same book. And he had this idea, but this was around the time that he was working on, I believe, Neverwhere, maybe the Graveyard Book. I'm not really sure. But he was working on some of his other major works, right? So he kind of set it aside. But he did actually, before that, he had like 5,000 words that he sent around to some of his friends. And one of his friends at the time was Terry Pratchett. And he sent it to him, and Terry Pratchett ended up reaching out to him like 9 months after he sent it to him and said, this idea is really good. I know what happens next. Either sell me this idea and I'll write it, or write this book with me and we'll split the profits 50-50. And so Neil Gaiman was super busy at the time with all this other stuff. At the time, Terry was older than him, and he looked up to him as a writer. He wasn't as immensely popular as he would later become, but he was further along in his career. This was when Neil Gaiman was like 27, 28, so still fairly young. And he said that in the interview, he says it's like Michelangelo asking you to like come and paint a chapel with him. He was like so honored to be invited to do this thing with him. So he's like, I'm going to make it work. So he ended up writing 3 novels at the same time. And one of them was this, and they used to do it by like, they'd write stuff on floppy disk and then send it to each other by post. Then they'd call each other up and just talk over ideas, talk about like what would be funny, so on and so forth. So that was Neil's kind of Neil Gaiman's like memory of it that he talks about on the Tim Ferriss podcast. I also looked up some more stuff about it. This is what Terry Pratchett said. He said, initially I did most of the Adam and the them, and Neil did most of the Four Horsemen, and everything else kind of got done by whoever. By the end, large sections had been done by a composite creature called Terry and Neil, whoever was actually hitting the keys. By agreement, I am allowed to say that Agnes Nutter, her life and death, was completely and utterly mine, and Neil proudly claims responsibility for the maggots. Neil's had a major influence on the opening scenes, me on the ending. In the end, it was a book done by 2 guys who shared the money equally and did it for fun and wouldn't do it again for a big clock. So that's his relating of what happened with this novel. And I know they've both said like by the end of it, they couldn't tell who had written what and who had done what and so forth.
It feels like to what the story feels like it's leading to, and I don't, because I haven't looked into it at all. It just sounds like to me like is there like some bad blood there? Like did it not end well for them? Oh no.
Oh no. Okay. Great friends.
Okay, good. Because I thought you were leading me to like
I don't
a
know
story
where you got
of,
that
like,
from.
Of tragedy. No. Yeah, I thought you were gonna say, and then
no. I mean, it's so Terry Pratchett died a few years ago, and that's what was tragic about it. And one of his we could talk about it more on the show, but one of his final wishes was he called Neil up and said like, you got to get this thing made because I want to see it before I die. But then he ended up dying
as a series.
Yeah, but he wanted to see it adapted because they said that when they originally sold the book, it immediately got bought by Hollywood back in the 90s. And it's been one of those projects that's been like in development and had different people attached to it, and it just never ended up happening.
This is like a kind of similar, I feel like. Have you seen Dogma?
Yes.
That's kind of like got some of the same things going on, right? I wonder when that was. I don't know when that movie came out, but I'm assuming it was
definitely
after.
later than 1990.
Yeah.
I don't know though. I mean, it was pretty early on. That was a Kevin Smith movie, or did he write that movie? I'm
pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he directed. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It does have some similar kind of stuff going on. Very different in other ways. I mean, this is way more British.
Yeah, that's another thing. Is like how British is this? They keep addressing the American audience too, which I find to be hilarious.
Yeah.
They keep saying like, for you Americans who don't understand what's going on over here.
Yeah, and you wonder some of that might have honestly been added for like the American editions because they will make different editions for novels, and sometimes they'll do that. So like I was saying, like Terry Pratchett's one of his last wishes to Neil was that he said, you got to see this thing done so that it can actually see the light of day, the adaptation. And so Neil Gaiman kind of took that as like, this is his last wish, and I'm going to take it into making this thing. And he said that the whole time he was making it, he wanted the whole time in the back of his head, he was like, I have to please Terry, because Terry was like way more picky about things and would say no to more things, whereas I guess Neil's a lot more agreeable and tends to compromise on stuff, in his words at least. And he said that he always had like Terry in the back of his mind, and he was like trying to please him and stuff. So he talks a lot about it, and it's really powerful stuff. It's good stuff.
Wow. Yeah, so you double faked me, didn't you? You said there wasn't a tragedy, and then you fucking dropped a bomb on me.
A different kind of tragedy, not a falling out though, just more like Terry Pratchett died, and yeah, I mean, to hear Neil talk about him is really interesting stuff. So we are going to go through like a plot summary for the first half. So we're going to spoil some stuff for the first half here. So if you don't want to be spoiled, now's the time to check out. Otherwise, stick around. All right, so the summary I have is divided up into 3 paragraphs for this first half that we've read. So I'm going to read each paragraph, and then we can kind of talk about everything that goes on. It's very broad strokes, so we can kind of dive into it as we want. But here we go. Good Omens is the story of an angel and a demon who are both trying to do their jobs that are part of the great plan. Although Aziraphale and Crowley are adversaries by nature and profession, their relationship develops into a friendship merely because of the time spent together over thousands of years. In this unlikely pairing, compromises are made between the two of them so that they can both appear to be accomplishing their mission without overcoming the other too much. When the birth of the Antichrist occurs, they agree to work together to try to see if their influences on the child have any effect. By the time they locate the correct child, it is almost too late as Armageddon is about to begin. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop, and let's talk about first and foremost, Aziraphale and Crowley and their relationship and all that at the beginning.
I found it to be like kind of, I don't know if you interpreted it this way, but I found it to be really timely because, I mean, I guess it's always timely. It's just these two fundamentally opposing forces who find that they have common ground somewhere and then come together and work together in order to meet that common ground or come together to solve a common goal or whatever. And it just, to me, is just speaking to the fact that although you can be from a totally different background from someone, completely different ideology, and still work together and be amicable in ways. These are demons and angels working together. So, and it's played for laughs a lot of the time. It's played for, Aziraphale maybe not being as holy or as good as he should be, and Crowley maybe being a little better than he should be as a demon. He's not quite as cruel as you might expect. I
love the way they play this. You have the angel on one side he keeps talking about the ineffableness of God and, his infallibility and how that everything that happens has to be part of the design, and then that immediately opens the door for Crowley to say like, well, then we can go ahead and do this thing, and that'll all be part of the design. So he immediately is sort of pointing out how thinking that way is pointless, because anything you do, you can retroactively say, well, obviously this was part of his design. He's ineffable or whatever. So it's funny how they play that, and then I love that both sides feel like all the other demons and angels who aren't there on the ground like don't understand the real world and like the whole free will thing and how that affects life, and they're all like remote and sort of abstract view of life and what should be and shouldn't be. Whereas like when you're actually on the ground and you see like people struggling and you see the short lives and people trying to make the best of it and how like it really seems like both that's where Crowley and Aziraphale connect, right? Is both of their love of the earth and sushi restaurants and bookstores and actually like living lives, and they both are in love with that. And they both think that heaven and hell are boring by comparison, or hell's more interesting, he says, but like
it's still suffering.
Heaven is boring as shit, and it's still like they're both still neither of them are as interesting as Earth is. And I love that idea. The
idea that an angel and a demon could be jealous, or they can see something that even humans can't see. But to think of our flaws, creating amazing art, like they talk about, the music is better on the dark side, like on their side, and it makes sense because like people who are tortured or people who are dealing with things tend to, not in all cases, but it seems like there's some correlation to be made there. To me, like seeing the gray area there for me is really fun, and thinking of heaven and hell as boring is really funny to me as well. Yeah. Because it's like it's not as it's the free will thing creates randomness, and that actually brings up a good point with the free will thing. So it seems like these two, this angel and this demon in this case, have some form of free will because they're able to make the decision, unless this really was part of the plan.
That's
all
the
along,
ultimate question of free will: is it all an illusion or not? I mean, whether you're talking about determinism as a philosophical standpoint, saying that none of us truly have free will, everything we're doing has been determined before we do it, or if you're talking about from like a grander scheme, like God controls all of it. So either of those two ways, actually, that would point to having no free will. Whereas if you argue that you do have free will, then that kind of runs in counter with the idea of an all-powerful God who controls everything, because you can't control everything if you can't control our free will. I think they're kind of like, without getting too serious about it, they're poking fun at it and showing some of the holes that they see, and I like that.
Or potentially just to play devil's advocate, haha. In this case, just potentially pointing at the mystery. Maybe there is an answer, maybe there's not. Maybe it's both. Maybe, you know what I mean? I guess it's an oxymoron for it to be both, because one counteracts the other. But it's like it's unanswerable. So I guess it's kind of like, what's the point anyway? Let's kind of
think that. But I have a vague memory in my intro to philosophy course I took at college with them talking about there was like a middle theory that compromised both free will and determinism. So there is some of that stuff. I don't remember the details, but anyway, also I love the idea of these two adversaries who've been there since the beginning of time, which I also love how it was like, it happened like, what did they say? Like 10,000 million years ago or something, like some nonsense number is what is the answer for like how long ago, the universe was created, which was very good. So having these two characters develop an affinity for each other over time, throughout all human history, it really makes sense, right? Like it's at a certain point, they're the only other thing in existence that can understand what the other has been through, because they're the same age or theoretically, and they've seen the same stuff, and they've lived through a lot of the same things. So even though they're your adversary, you kind of could develop this friendship, and I totally buy that. And I don't know, it's just perfect.
They're both answering to someone, whether it's the same person or not. Right. Clearly, it's not. They both have a higher power to answer to. So they're both kind of in the trenches together, kind of like eventually
and they're both like bending the rules to make the other one look good. They're like, yeah, I'll say you did this if you say I did this, and we can play it this way. And
there's like some selfish stuff there, but it's also like patting each other's back. And I love it. And the idea that like at one point Crowley is like, oh man, I knew the apocalypse was eventually going to come, but it's like, I can't believe it's now, and it's just such a bother. And
they set up these characters who love the earth and they love living, and when the apocalypse comes around, it's like, even though he's a demon, he's like, I don't want this whole thing to end. I like this. And similarly, Aziraphale doesn't want it to end either. Let's get into it now. So then you also get this really fun baby swap situation that with the chattering nuns of Satan or whatever, which is like the order of chattering nuns. So good. So funny.
I mean, the idea of a satanic order of nuns, like nuns that are they've been like basically raised in satanic rituals and everything all along the way.
They're all just supposed to not stop talking is like their thing, right? So.
Yeah, it's so funny.
And they all have names like Sister Loquacious, and I can't remember the other ones. They're all like something to do with like talking a lot, right?
Right.
Very good. So yeah, we get this sort of. I mean, God, I love the way it was written too, because it was broken down in a really funny way. But yeah, we get this baby swap happen. And it all comes down to a moment where there's a miscommunication by Wink, which I thought was really funny. Like a winking of like, when I winked, I meant this thing, but then they thought that when they saw the wink, it meant this other thing. And
yeah, breaking down the winks, like this is what this person interpreted the wink as, but winks are kind of indistinguishable. So this is actually what they thought that was going on, and it was just so funny to get that kind of like macro view of it.
Yeah. So what happens is the Antichrist gets born and swapped. And the Antichrist is going to be raised now by the Young family, and then this other baby, which is called Warlock, is raised by the family that Aziraphale and Crowley initially think have the Antichrist. Now it's interesting too because Crowley actually scolds Aziraphale over which I think I say his name different every time I say it, so I apologize for that, but I just can't like decide in my own mind how to say it. So I just say it however I feel like it. That's how it comes out. Anyway, Crowley and Aziraphale, they're having this discussion, and it's about like nature versus nurture, right? And Crowley like scolds him. He's like, "How dare you think it has to do with anything other than nurture? Like, there's no inherent. Like, he's just a baby. Like, how dare you think that he could be evil?" And I think like convinces Aziraphale to believe that, but then we see that now not evil, like he's not just a normal baby. He's also got like lots of powers. Right. So maybe while not being evil, there is something different about the Antichrist as far as just like power level seems to be way higher.
Yeah. The idea that they were setting up so initially he was supposed to go with the diplomatic family, and it was supposed to be this whole like perfect situation for them to go in and bring this kid up and like raise him to be the Antichrist that he's going to be. But the entire time they're bringing up the wrong kid. They're like training up this other guy, teaching him all kinds of things that the Antichrist would need to know. Meanwhile, this kid's just like figuring himself out on his own. Yeah.
So speaking of that, I'm going to read the second paragraph of plot synopsis here. From the beginning, it is clear that Aziraphale and Crowley are both instigators in their own way. Their instigations are having an enormous effect on the course of events in the world. After the birth of the Antichrist, Crowley convinces Aziraphale that they should do as they need to do in order to influence the child's upbringing. They appear in the child's life as the nanny and the gardener, as well as other characters that will place them near the child. Panic sets in, however, as they discover that they have been influencing the wrong child. Due to a baby switch gone awry, the Antichrist arrived at the hospital 11 years prior. They have been spending their time and energies on the wrong child. I'm not sure about that sentence, but yeah, we already talked about it. There was a baby swap mix-up. They spend a bunch of time trying to educate this child in their own ways. So they spend all this time like kind of fucking with this child that is totally not the Antichrist, and this child named Warlock. And finally they realize on the 11th birthday that he isn't the Antichrist. And I really like that because the Hellhound is supposed to show up, right? That was the big thing. And Crowley even like talks to Hell and says like, "Oh, is the Hellhound on his way?" And they're like, "Yeah, we already sent it." And he's like, "Oh, there he is. Oh, good boy. I see him now. Don't worry about it." It was really funny.
It's so good. There's a couple things here that I just want to rattle off. Every tape turns into Queen after a certain amount of time, and the tape it's like Beethoven and all these like classical works are being turned into Queen.
So the trailer has Under Pressure by Queen as the song.
Oh, nice. Dude, yeah. Oh my God, fantastic song. I think David Bowie's in that one too. So
cool. Yeah.
Little David Bowie shout out too. So and then communicating with the superiors, they can like tune into his radio to talk to Crowley through it. And he drives super fast and like he's like so ridiculous, but he's like
their powers are fun, right? Like both of their powers are pretty fun. They can just kind of like change things in reality and do all
and Crowley uses it to his advantage, and then Aziraphale is always yeah, exactly. And and then Aziraphale is like trying to use it for good for the most part. Like he's not only producing miracles at important moments that need to be. There's a bunch of other like stories that offshoot this like major storyline here too that we may end up missing a couple here and there, but we get these other demons that show up, and they're kind of like saying like, this is what I did, and this is the kind of stuff that I this is the evil that I've been up to basically. And they're like I love that Crowley like berates them for using like old school tactics, like 16th century ways of torturing people and dealing with people as a demon.
Spend decades getting one soul to turn. Whereas he's like, that's such an old way of looking at things. Now you got to hit the masses. There's too many people now, and you can't.
So he's like Crowley's like spreading bad days to people and stuff.
He's like give everybody bad days with like bad traffic or something. I can't remember. Yeah.
And then it just like permeates and goes and like gives everybody a bad. It's super super smart, super funny,
but they of course are not impressed. Like they're like, what did you do? You caused a traffic jam,
right? Yeah. And he's just like, if only they realized. And it's such a. It's so brilliant. It's so smart.
And I think that was the initial idea. That scene, I think, was probably some of the early words that he wrote. Maybe a different version, I don't know. But that sounds like the initial nugget of idea. We always like to try and find those initial idea starter things. And I think that's an interesting one. That and then the baby swap, right? And it is funny because it's like the Omen, right? But the Omen, if the Antichrist went to like a different family and was raised to be a good child and all that stuff, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It's just like the Omen, and then Rosemary's Baby. It was the other one that it made me think of. If you see, they're taking these ideas that are, tend to be more like horror or something that's like to be feared, and then just making it ridiculous, putting them in situations that just, I don't know, lead to some of the funniest things I've read in a book.
Yeah. So when they go looking for the Antichrist, some really fun stuff starts to happen. First off, we meet some side characters. So they meet Anathema, who is the descendant of Agnes Nutter, and she's a witch, and she ends up dropping her book, which is the prophecies, in the car on accident when she gets a ride from Crowley and Aziraphale.
Well, and not to mention they wrecked into her. She was riding her bike and they like hit her with the car.
Or she ran into them or something. I don't know. It was unclear. Yeah.
And then that's what I was talking about with the miracles. Like Aziraphale like got the chance to use miracles, so he's like, don't worry, we'll give you a ride. And he's like, Crowley's like, no, we won't. There's no rack on the car. How are we gonna move the bike? And he's like, yes, there is. There's a rack there now.
Yeah.
And then when they drop her off, like her bike has like gears now. He's like souped up her bike and made it way better and stuff.
Yeah. He overdid it. Maybe I overdid it a touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. So we meet Anathema, who is a more important character going forward. And we also briefly meet Newt Pulsifer, who is a child initially, seems to be precocious, and then later on he's going to be looking into this other witch finder thing, which we'll get to in the next part here. But in this section, I think we could talk about they show up at the hospital to find out what happened, and they find that like all the nuns have left except for one who's no longer a nun now, and she's running it's just like a community center conference center thing, and they're having some sort of team building paintball gunfight. And when they go in, like Crowley turns all the guns into real guns, and then all the people just keep shooting at each other. It's pretty.
They're
silly,
talking about like the ruthlessness of business was being kind of put in there, and like the idea that it's like kill or be
killed. Like the cops show up, but then like they're shooting at the cops and stuff.
Yeah.
But he does make it so that he makes it so that nobody will die. I think maybe just to sort of appease Aziraphale or something. I don't know, or maybe because he is actually a good demon. I don't know.
I think Aziraphale gets shot and he's like, "Oh my god, I've been shot! I can't believe this is going." And then like he's like, "Well, do you bleed blue?" And he's like asking like why. That's like initially how they find out that it's a paintball fight.
Well, because it was an interesting part where he's like, "Ah, man, I'm gonna have to get another body," and then Hell's gonna ask all these questions, and so it was interesting to think that like they can die, and it is at least a headache if they were to do it.
Yeah, and speaking of dying, when they realized that they had swapped the wrong kid and they'd been bringing up the wrong kid as the Antichrist, they were like, yeah, well, what if the other kid ended up dead? And they were like, well, if he ended up dead, then he would have ended up down in hell or whatever, and people would have been upset a long time ago.
Right. All right, so you know what? I think I'm going to read this last section of plot synopsis here, and then we can just kind of talk about the rest.
Sounds good.
Meanwhile, young Adam and his friends are enjoying the summer as normal 11-year-olds. Adam is the Antichrist. Through an interesting turn of events, Adam meets his neighbor Anathema, who is a self-proclaimed witch. When she passes magazines along to him, his nighttime reading creates real-life havoc. It is these strange events that catch the eye of Newt Pulsifer, a witchfinder detective in the Witchfinder Sergeant Shadwell's Witchfinder Army. As Newt investigates the strange goings-on, he pays a visit to Tadfield, which seems to have its own unusual story, perfect weather all year round. Not really true. Perfect weather is usual weather, or typical weather, which is supposed to be like it's unusual because the weather never cooperates. Like it's too normal. Which was a good detail, man. There's a lot of stuff to talk about there, so let's dive into it.
I really liked how they described what was her name,
Pepper.
Pepper, yeah, Pepper.
Whose actual name is like Moonfield, Pippin Moonfield Moonchild or something. What is it?
Yeah, Pippin Galadriel Moonchild.
Yes,
It's got to be a Galadriel reference, right? That's got to be
Lord of the Rings, man. Another project we've covered.
Yeah. So I really liked her character, though. They kind of talked about her introduction to the group of, like, I think it's like 3 other boys, including Adam. And then they like make fun of her name or something when she says her name, and she's all innocent, and then she like beats the hell out of all of them. Mm-hmm. And they, from that day forward, they were them. And I don't know. I like this idea that he's like
Adam's the default leader, and they all kind of look up to him, and he's got this like charisma about him,
exactly,
linked to his being Antichrist.
Exactly. So yeah, he's very charismatic, and like the idea that he has a following around him, and they're seemingly willing to do whatever, and then that's the other thing is the dog, the Hellhound. We have to talk about.
Oh yeah, I gotta talk about the Hellhound.
The Hellhound shows up. Our introduction to it is with Crowley saying like, "Where's the Hellhound?" And they're like, "Oh, it should be there." And he's like, "Oh, I see it." So when it actually did show up, it was like an angry, mean. It was going to be a crazy Hellhound.
It was going to be like the scariest. It's like the scariest dogs that even like wolves would be afraid of. And he's walking down the street, and he's like, no one's going to mess with him, and he's all Hellhoundish. Yeah, go ahead.
And then he like, I guess hears Adam talking about what he wants. What was it specifically? It was like kind of what he wanted from a dog.
what kind of dog he wants or something like that, because they're talking about him getting a dog.
And so being the Hellhound of Adam, he like turned into the dog that he described, which was like a little tiny dog that was like nice and cuddly and everything. And then I guess there's a funny line that it kind of says, being a little dog comes with a certain attitude, and like maybe a lot of that hostility and aggressiveness that he had turned into like exactly what you would expect out of a smaller dog, cuddly, smaller. We
found he had the sudden urge to wag his tail and like stuff like that. Yeah.
Right.
So he's turning into this other little dog, like this actual cute little Hellhound. It's really funny. And his name's Dog, I guess, right? Like the dog named Dog?
Right.
Okay. There's a moment later where he's trying to get him to come inside, and he doesn't want to. And then he's like, "Oh, I have to teach you to be obedient, or you're going to have to get rid of you." And he like forces him to actually do it. And then we find out it's because there's like a horseshoe above the door that's supposed to prevent like evil spirits from coming inside, and it's like melted now or something, because he had to like force his way in, because he doesn't realize that he's actually like supremely obedient.
Right.
It's just this one thing that he like was struggling to do.
Yeah, and that was going into Anathema's house. He was meeting her for the first time, which we should also talk about. He talked to her about being a witch, and I guess like he had the connotation of a witch being bad, and she was like, "No."
This is Adam, the Antichrist.
Correct, yeah, Adam. So he was talking to Anathema about being a witch, and she basically said like she wasn't a witch, she was an occultist. And then an occultist, and then
he's like, "Oh, okay, well, that's fine then."
He's fine with that. Yeah, he's like, "Oh, that's all right." So then he joins her, as long as you're not a witch. So then he goes to her house, and that's when he like commands the dog to come inside. And yeah, she like starts to influence kind of. She realizes there's something interesting about him, and I think she describes him as a young adolescent Greek god, right? The way that she perceives him, she can kind of tell that he's very special, and the world around him doesn't matter. He's just like that there's that much of a pull towards him. And
one of the things they talk about is like nuclear power and stuff, and they're talking about oh, it's not as cool as it should be. It like should be out and making noises when I went to visit it or whatever, but it wasn't. And anyway, and then so them having this conversation, we then cut over, and there's like a nearby nuclear power plant where the entire core has just gone missing.
And it's like 400 tons or something insane like that. Like it's not something easy to move.
So this is starting to show the power of Adam, right? Like he actually is immensely powerful, and he doesn't know it.
And I think he did that in his sleep, because it said that he was like, when we flash back, it was like, yeah, and Adam's fast asleep.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Aziraphale has realized that he has the prophecies, and he spends like a while just like reading this book, and because he collects like old, ancient, hard to find books, especially like versions of the Bible that were misprinted, which is really hilarious.
Incredible detail.
Or like have something funny in there.
There was one where it was like the commandments were one, instead of thou shalt not, it was like thou shall. Do you remember which one it was though?
Commit adultery, I think.
Commit adultery.
Commit adultery. Yeah, it was like misprinted, and yeah.
Really funny stuff. Like it's just like the idea that an angel's collecting these books.
It makes you feel like those might exist though, and like they would be a super rare thing if they did,
Yeah, maybe. Especially older ones
in the Bible. Yeah.
Like classic printings. That would be, I'm sure there's somebody out there who wants that. And like he keeps certain scrolls and like ancient things in like temperature controlled environments to preserve them, and he's like legit collecting these books, and that's why it's so funny that he gets Agnes Nutter's book from the chance encounter they have with Anathema in the car, and he brings it back, and then he's just like toiling over it for days, and he's like the cocoa that he sits down with it like congeals and then turns solid and there's dust all over him. So he's studying for a very long time, because this book, I guess we haven't really talked that much about it, but this book that we're supposedly reading and the book that he finds is like the only official perfect prophecy of all the events that would go down that ever existed. And it was published by Agnes Nutter, but she never sold a single copy. Even the initial copy, like basically the only copy that exists is the one that she got for writing the book. She got like the original copy, and then
one gratis copy.
that was the one that carried through, and that was passed down through generations. And you know, Anathema, when she loses it, is like devastated, and she says she can hear like her ancestors like laughing at her and like can't believe that this is how it all happened.
Yeah. There's another, to back up a little bit more, there's another great moment I'm just remembering now, when Crowley and Aziraphale get drunk together. Yeah. And they're like talking about what's going to happen with the apocalypse, and Crowley's like, oh, the Leviathan's going to be a great big bugger, and they're all just talking about different shit that's going to go down. And then at one point they're like, man, I can't have this debate while I'm drunk, let's get sober. And then they both just like make themselves sober, which I thought was fun. It was good. We also haven't talked about the Four Horsemen at all, who we've gotten, so I think two of them we've just gotten like brief mentions of them, but then there are two, Carmine, who I believe is war, and Sable, who I believe is famine. And it's not explicitly laid out, but I think it's pretty sure that's who they are.
Well, for war specifically, it's Carmine, and they call her Scarlet as well.
They call her
and
Scarlet,
for that one,
it's all right. It's all like red stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, we're pretty certain that that's war. Like I think.
Well, so she's a war journalist, and right. She works at like a rag, like a terrible magazine. But everybody who does war journalism knows that like wherever she goes, she's going to be there right when the war breaks out. And so they all think she's this amazing journalist, but we know that she's actually causing the wars to break out.
Right. And she's like, she constantly has people fighting over her and around her and that kind of stuff. And we get this scene in a bar, which, are we going to talk about that now?
Sure.
Or
Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, we get this scene in a bar where I think that this is supposed to represent some sort of real life's going on with countries at war, and it's like this like bar fight basically, and they're pulling guns on each other and everything. But I think it's supposed to represent, you know, countries at war, or things that are constantly going on. Anyway, she is in the middle of all this, and they're all arguing about a piece of land basically, which brought to mind like the idea of like people, Palestine and Israel, fighting over.
Although I think they're just fighting over like the bar, right? Like this is a like a strategically important spot according to them, and they're arguing over it. Yeah.
So yeah, they're arguing about all this stuff, and basically in the middle of all this, a delivery guy shows up and he brings a package, and she opens it, and it's like this like kind of unremarkable sword, but you can tell that it's like useful. It's been used. It's like ancient, but it looks unused.
Yeah. At first it's described as like not being magical, but then it's later described as being like a really deadly weapon.
So she's wielding that, and everybody around them is like freaking out, and I think they pull guns on her, and then I think we cut away, assuming
like something happens, like something like all the glass explodes or something, and then like everybody dies. What it was.
Yeah. I knew everybody died. I thought it was implied, but yeah, you're right. It was the glass that killed everyone.
Yeah. So she's obviously serious. Means business. And she's being summoned for the apocalypse. That's what this signifies. Now let's also talk about Sable, because I think that's the other one that we get a lot of. He is like he's like one of those like fad diet book writers, and also controls like a company that does like supplements or like this like alternative food stuff. And I love it because like this woman comes to get him to sign his book, and he can tell she's like gonna die in like 2 years from starvation, and she's super thin, and he's happy about it. So like this is a guy who loves seeing people starve, and so his food that he makes has like no nutritional value at all, and if you eat it only like you're gonna die. And there's like all these burger joints that make this like fake burger stuff that he did that, you know, is super bad for you. There's a scene where he goes to one of these burger joints and orders food, and then like gets annoyed because the cook is happy, and he, you know, he doesn't like his attitude, and he wants to get him fired. Now, did you catch what they were trying to do with that cook? Like there was like a secret reveal there?
I didn't know. Whatever this is, I don't know what
Okay.
the reveal was here.
So earlier on, and I forget at what part, they're talking about there's like 4 things that were written or like predictions that were made or something, theories. And there were like a lot of them were like 2 of them were about Elvis Presley. Like one was like he's an alien or he got abducted by aliens. Another one said he's alive and well in the Midwest. And then there was there's a couple other things. And he says one of these things is true. Well, the chef, when he walks away, is singing an Elvis song to himself, and he's described as being a stocky fellow with like a pompadour style hair or something. Nice. I forget what it's called, like a cowlicky hair or something. So I think it's like a wink and a nod. Maybe that's Elvis.
That's funny. No, I didn't even catch that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. That's the kind of stuff that like I guarantee you could just dig into this book repeatedly and find new stuff every time.
Well, and everybody's name means something, and these are all names that are linked to like real, quote unquote, real demons and stuff, and angels, and they all have their own like deep history. And I'm sure there's like little nods to that if you really know their histories really well. I don't always, but
right. And they're quoting scripture and stuff here. I guarantee there's all kinds of parallels to the Bible that they're drawing that is passing me by. I'm sure it's supposed to pass a lot of people by, unless you're like, unless you study theology or something. I did want to say just the idea. I've always been fascinated by this idea of the Four Horsemen, and I think media in general has been. As you can see, there's movies, games, TV shows, everything with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in it. Yeah. But I like using them and I think they use that to their advantage, because I think that you think of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse as being deadly and scary, and then they place them as deadly and scary people in this comedy. Yeah. I mean, more comedic. It is, and I do want to say, as much as we're saying it's a comedy, there is a lot of drama to it, and I think that like it does end up having a lot of depth to it. It's not like it's just like superficial comedy that's going on.
Right.
I like a lot of what's going on, but the idea of putting like these really terrifying entities within this more comedic story, I think, is really fun.
Yeah, and I mentioned Supernatural earlier, and there's a whole series of things that happens, I think in like season 4 or 5 with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and to me that's some of my favorite parts of that show. I'm not like a huge Supernatural fan, but I have watched a lot of it. It's one of those shows that I can just turn on and then like browse Twitter, and like I don't feel like I'm missing a lot if I check out every now and then, check back in. But regardless, there was a whole series that was very good, actually, that had the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in it, and honestly, it's very reminiscent of this, in my opinion. Nice. Now, we do actually get 2 mentions here that I have in my notes of the other 2 horsemen. So one is called Mr. White, and in his section, he causes an oil spill to take place, wreaking havoc on the environment. And then another is briefly said who is unnamed, but who is everywhere. And I get the implication that is probably death, and the other one is like pestilence or disease or whatever, is my understanding of it. So I'll be definitely curious to see these other 2 when they all get together and we see them. This is also all reminiscent to me a little bit of American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Like the idea of having these like godlike figures placed in modern society and still having their powers and stuff. That's a lot of what American Gods is about.
It's so funny. I think I literally have American Gods and what's Neil Gaiman's
Neverwhere?
book? Neverwhere. I think I have both of those books on my bookshelf and haven't read them. I think I just somehow got them at one point. And like honestly, like, and the other one that I think the one that I'm really, really excited to read is the Norse mythology book that he has. Because I think that came out fairly recently, and like Norse mythology, one of our listeners recommended that we check it out as well. And like I really want to read the Norse mythology, because I love that kind of stuff anyway. And then I'm seeing how he handles it here, and I just feel like I gotta read more Gaiman, and honestly, Pratchett at that, because
I haven't read that one, but I agree. Also want to do more Pratchett. But during that interview, he talks a lot about the Graveyard Book, which is another Neil Gaiman novel. And after hearing him talk about that book, that's the one that's now risen to the top of my list of ones that I want to read by him. So nice. I wonder if you'll feel the same way once you actually watch it.
Is it adapted?
I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'll look into it though. Maybe I'll see if there's any plans or anything. That would be cool. But I just want to read it. It seems really good. Okay, so let's continue here. Newt. Well, I want to call him Newt Scamander, but that's not his name.
Pulsifer.
Newt Pulsifer, and him joining up with Shadwell, and he's this like one-man witchfinder army guy who has like a ad in the newspaper that Newt finds and shows up, and it's all really funny and really good.
Shadwell, to me, I was like, oh my god, I love this book, and this is fairly deep into our half of this reading here for this week, and Shadwell shows up, and I've been loving the book. I'm like, god, I love this book so much. And then we meet Shadwell, and I'm like, god, this guy is just like straight up offensive. I'm like, this guy sucks. I'm like, all this stuff. And the best part is I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, is this just of the time? Is it like the 90s? Is it what is it, like, what's going on here? And then they address it. They're like, yeah, he's racist, but he hates everyone equally.
Yeah,
doesn't
he's
matter
racist
their
against
race,
everybody. He's just a misanthrope. He hates everyone and everything. Right. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like the awareness is, I appreciated that, because I was like, as long as they understand that this character sucks, like, I'm on board.
Yeah, I didn't think he sucked. I don't know. I kind of liked him as old grouch.
I guess it's not that he sucked. It was just that he was saying things that I was just like, ooh, I don't love that. And then
there's a weird situation too where like he lives next door to this woman who I can't tell if she's supposed to be a fortune teller or a dominatrix or just like a prostitute or what, or like, and she also has like all these gentleman callers, and I don't know, man, maybe she's all of the above.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what she is. I have a feeling she's going to be important for more of the story. Obviously, I think that there's something else going on, but yeah,
it's definitely funny. Her like people are calling for her, and like I guess at one point Newt picks up the phone and tells the person on the other end like what underwear he's wearing, and like just gets hung up on or something. That was the implication.
I can't tell what she is.
Yeah, but she's also doing like a seance at one point and all this stuff. So yeah, I don't know. Funny though. So now that we're on to Shadwell, there's actually a line here that I wrote down because it was striking to me in that every now and then when we're doing these books, I come across something and I think, there's no way this would have flown in like a workshop as a writer. This is a very like writer thing. So if you'll forgive me. But so I read this line and I thought this would get redlined like crazy. Like people would all be like, nope, can't say this. And let me give you the line. You can tell me what you thought of it. But here it is. A voice the color of an old raincoat rumbled, "I." That's the line. Mm-hmm. So it's a voice the color of an old raincoat rumbled, I. Okay, so there's like 5 things in that sentence that would make so many writing teachers and fellow writers I know like immediately just say like, oh, this has to be rephrased or change this or whatever. But there's also like something really wonderful about it that I kind of like. So I don't know. I just had this moment of like questioning, like, what have I been taught? I don't know. And it's one of those difficult things, man, because people break rules sometimes and they do it well and they do it for a reason and it works. And to me, this is a rule-breaking thing on multiple levels. Can you pick out? I mean, you can probably pick out some of the reasons why, right?
Well, yeah, clearly. I mean, it's not making any sense. Like you can't. Right. A voice doesn't have a color, and like clearly, like all that is the problem. But then grammatically, like the colon I seems weird to me as well.
Yeah, colons are almost always taken out whenever people see them. They don't like them. And then and it's a voice that is a color, and that voice is rumbling, and then a colon. Yeah, it's just like there's a bunch of things in there that are just like we're told not to do that.
Right, but it's so funny because it's like you can kind of suss out what he means. You know what I mean? I think that's the best part.
Oh no, I think it's great, and it was a line that like it stopped me in my tracks when I read it, and I was like, man, that's incredible.
Right,
and it's also incredible because it's like you're not supposed to do it. Mm-hmm. Because you're taking a sound and you're comparing it to a color, and then you're using a colon, and then also like it's also like you're comparing it to a color that you don't even then explain. An old raincoat, like I guess that could be yellow, but it's not explicit.
Dingy yellow, right? Yeah. But then he also turns it back into a sound, which is
because
really
it's rumbling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now maybe I'm wrong, and maybe a lot of people would say, oh no, that's actually good for this reason. And the reason I can see is that this book is fun, right? That we talked about, like down to the line, like it's having fun with you and it's playing jokes. And this is kind of jokey in a way, but it's also a very, like, in my opinion, very Neil Gaiman line. I don't know that he's the one who wrote this, but it feels very Neil Gaiman to me. And it's that sort of like almost synesthesia, like you're taking two things that aren't alike and you're comparing them. And there's a nice kind of like moment where you you see what that means, and it's an interesting reveal. But I do think there's also a cautionary tale here for people who are in workshops. It's that you have to be careful not to stamp out creative ideas and original thinking and clever rule breaking whenever you see it, because I think you can fall into a rut of like, here are the rules, I've learned them, and whenever I identify something that breaks the rules, I'm going to cross it out and recommend they change it. Right. And it's a shame, because I think this would be a line that would be a shame to remove.
So I know people say like rules are made to be broken and all this kind of stuff, but you know, within reason, I think that's really what it's there for. It's if you're doing it every line, if you're constantly doing it, you're clearly doing something wrong. But if you're calling attention to something by having it done wrong, I think that's a conscious decision. Like you're clearly, if you can prove to yourself, you don't have to prove to anyone else, but if you can say like, this is the reason that I'm doing this, and it's not just you're doing it to break the rules. Yeah. And you can say like you have a reason and you can do it confidently. I think that's the time to break the rules. And like you said, like I think that like stamping that kind of stuff out, that's where like the creative has to be like, you know what, I'm going to put my foot down and this is where I'm going to draw a line in the sand and say like, this has to stay for me. And
it's so hard because you can get in your head and start thinking that that's true all the time. Like, oh, they just don't understand my genius, you know, which is the other big cliche of like, you're not willing to edit yourself at all because no one understands your vision, you know, and then that's like ridiculous. Right. So you have to find that, and that's that's why this thing isn't science, you know, writing is not a science. It's, you know, and there's no right answer. And even in workshops where you're trying to teach people quote unquote rules, they're all come with huge asterisks next to them of like, this is to follow this except for when you don't have to. And I think this is a novel that, because of the novel it is, gets away with this thing. What you don't want to do is see something like this in a story or in a book that like is completely not of this style, right? And it stands out and it's clearly an issue. Or it's done for the reason of someone didn't know any better. They didn't realize they were doing something that's kind of rule breaky here, and they just did it by accident. And that's never good either. Like you said, you want it to be done with intention.
Right. Whether it was Pratchett or Gaiman, you can be damn sure that they knew what they were doing. Like they weren't breaking it. They weren't ignorantly being like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here.
No. Absolutely. I'm not trying to imply that at all. Hopefully it didn't come off that way. I think it's a brilliant line, and ultimately I loved it. It just really stopped me in my tracks and made me think about like, you have to be careful, because I think there's a voice in my head that would self-censor and prevent me from writing a line like that sometimes. And I have to be careful about that, because that can be the downside, I think, of maybe learning too much about writing, honestly, and how it can maybe affect you negatively sometimes. Anyway, so let's move on. I think that's just my moment of like, I had this really, I had to like set down the book and just think about it for a while because I was so like kind of struck by it. Nice. But I did want to mention, so going back to Adam and his friends, they're having this really interesting conversation about Atlantis, right? And what Atlantis was like, and what it would be like if they could go there and like have underwater houses and all this stuff. And then the ruins in real life raise up, and that just demonstrates the like raw power of the Antichrist, right? Like he's literally just talking about this with his friends and makes it come true. Pretty wild.
The implication here is that not only so seemingly Atlantis didn't exist before this, and he was like, how cool would it be if that was an actual thing? And then it like created the history and lore of it always having been there, and then raising it. It's like that's insane.
And populated it with people who lived there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's wild, man. And then the other thing is they start talking about Hollow Earth filled with like these Tibetan monks that or whatever that like tunnel from place to place, and we haven't seen it yet, but I assume that this is all going to be true now, right?
Yeah.
That's the implication.
It's Tibetan monks burrowing holes. And it was like, they were like bringing up, they were saying like, why wouldn't they just dig straight through the earth rather than like digging tunnels all the way across?
So he's like, I guess that's what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Okay, man. I mean, this is basically where we stopped, right? Like we got everybody's descending on Tadfield now, which is where Adam is, because they found out that the Antichrist isn't who they thought he was. He's here instead. So we get basically everybody heading there, including Newt, who is identified that this is a place of possible witchery. And so he's going to investigate that for the WA, which is the Witchfinder army, which is really funny because it's also being like funded by both Aziraphale and Crowley, because they both think there's like a whole army of them, but it's actually just one guy who's been lying and saying it's a whole army, which I thought was good.
I think they privately talked to each other and said like, yeah, well, I have some people that are like they'll all get together, and then he's like, yeah, I have some people as well, and then they all, but I don't think they know that they're both going to the same person. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
same
their
one
sources
guy,
are the same source, so it's just funny.
It's Shadwell, and then his one disciple he has now with Newt, who he sends. So yeah, I mean, all of our characters are converging. So I think all that's left for us to do maybe is speculate a little bit, have a little bit of fun speculating on what we think is going to happen. How do you think this thing's going to go down?
I don't know. I don't know if I can really. It's too absurd to really nail down. I don't think that I can
really
just say
tough.
like exactly what's going to happen. But I think like clearly, apocalyptic things are going to start to happen, and then it's just whether or not Adam realizes his power and if he wants to be good or bad. I guess,
what are you excited to see? I guess is maybe a better way to go about this one. What's something coming that you're? Yeah, the Four Horsemen. I agree.
The Four Horsemen. Like, what are they going to do? What is that going to look like? Is there going to be battle? There has to be some sort of battles going on or something like whether it's I don't know.
They're not going to like Aziraphale and Crowley like interfering with it, right? They're going to be fighting for the apocalypse, obviously.
Right.
That's what their job
I have to assume there will be fighting, but it would be funny to subvert it and have it be like they were able to talk their way out of it, because they were able to talk their way out of everything so far. So if they could just talk their way out of the entire apocalypse, that would be pretty wild.
Definitely. Yeah, man, I'm so into it. I'm looking forward to the same. Definitely the Four Horsemen. I hope at some point we're gonna get a Leviathan. I think we probably will. I want to see if both Satan and God get like involved more, and if we see some sort of like like a personification of either of them, or something else coming to Earth. Would be really fascinating.
You just brought up a great thing that we didn't talk about. They were talking about God and the way that he works. And the way that he's like playing a chess game that no one but he knows the rules to. I just thought that all of the stuff, it was a really long section, I can't remember all of it, but all that stuff was just really funny and it makes you think, like what, if there, you know what I mean, if this is the case, this is what people are assuming that he's doing. It's like if all of this was a plan, then he's just like, is this just some crazy experiment, but he's keeping it within a certain, I don't know. It's all really interesting.
Is it going to be revealed that this was all? Because the idea of introducing a prophecy that's accurate further lends the weight to determinism, right? Like the idea that this is all predetermined. It's going to happen this way.
I think that this story will lean into not picking a side.
Oh, no, of course.
You know what I mean?
It's not going to come down either way.
But I would like to see it choose a side. I think that could be pretty interesting if it did. If it was like, this is, if it was like everything was predicted. I don't know. Could be kind of interesting. Something else I'm really excited for is the fact that this is being adapted, and like what does that even look like as a show? I'm really excited to see like how balls to the wall they're gonna go.
It's funny. I didn't realize you hadn't seen a trailer, man.
I haven't seen anything. No, I really stayed away from it.
You should definitely. Well, I don't know. Maybe don't check it out. Just watch the show at this point.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be able to stop myself, but I might watch the trailer. We'll see. It's not. It doesn't spoil too much, does it?
It kind of shows a lot, honestly. It shows some stuff that we haven't even got to yet in the book.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll wait till I'm done with the book and then I'll watch it.
I kind of wish I had, honestly. I was too curious that I couldn't hold back. All right, man. I think that's going to be a good spot to leave this until next week. I did have one other comparison I wanted to make. There was something about this book that reminded me of another project we covered, and I forgot to bring it up earlier. So I think I'm going to share that with you at the very end. How's that sound?
Sounds cool. I'm trying to rack my brain right now and figure out what it was.
Yeah, I feel like if I give you any more hints, you'll probably figure it out. But there was something in this book that reminded me directly of another project we covered.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, before we get to that, we just want to thank you for listening. We hope you come back next week when we cover the second half of this novel and the show after that. If you liked this episode, please let us know in the form of a review on iTunes or wherever you found this podcast. That'd be super helpful for us. Best way to get the word out. And we also wanted to thank patron Grant J. Thank you so much for being a patron. He has been for a long time now. Help keep this show going. And if you wanted to find out how to become a patron yourself, go to patreon.com/inktofilm, and you can see all the bonus content that we do there. We do monthly episodes, and I think this month we're probably going to be talking about the latest season of Game of Thrones. So definitely check that out.
Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those at inktofilm, and definitely jump in on that book giveaway we're trying to do. If you want to like those posts and share and tag some people, that'd be great. Join our Council of Inklings, where we post polls and talk about adaptation news and other things going on in there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that giveaway is running till May 31st. That'll be the final day to enter, and then we'll be giving it out. I will probably announce winners on June 1st, so look for that. But yeah, we also wanted to thank Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts.
And thank you to Music Lover for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man, so if you're ready, I'm going to hit you with a comparison I had. Going all the way back to the beginning for us, the them reminded me a lot of the Losers Club from It.
Interesting. You know what's so funny about what you just did is that I was going to say It as a joke. I was about to be like, oh yeah, I think I nailed it. It was It. And then I was going to make the joke because I was trying to think of what would be the furthest thing from this. So yeah, but I do see the comparison.
Yeah, tonally way, way, way different. Yeah.
But I see the comparison to the group of kids. I totally get that, like kind of like Stand By Me, Goonies, like Losers Club type thing. Yeah,
it's a bunch of boys with one girl there. When they're having the meeting and they're out in the like junkyard essentially, and they have their like little like secret hideout. That all was very reminiscent of the Losers Club to me. So that was our very first project. So just going all the way back, I actually had a little bit of pang of nostalgia for that.
Sometimes I randomly think about the fact that there's a scene in Stephen King's It where the kids like bury themselves in a pit and like get a bunch of smoke going and like all hallucinate and almost die. I just think about that scene sometimes. It's a fucking crazy scene.
There are a lot of crazy scenes in that. If you want to hear our takes on them, we talk about them at length in our first 5 episodes. It was a lot of fun. I cringe a little bit listening to some of those old ones just because we were so raw and new at this whole thing, but a lot of fun, and we're going to be revisiting that later with It Chapter 2 comes out later this year, so stick around for that if you're curious. But yeah, I think that's it for now, and until next time.
Thank you for listening.